And that, the whole thing, I just don't understand the concept, how that's going to help a tenant. Those people are happy to break the law now. When all these new laws comes out, those landlords will still be happy to break the law.
So Sarah, Renters' Right Bill, tell me about it.
Right, so the Renters' Rights Bill is going to change the private rented sector as we know it. It's being pushed through government at a mega fast speed, and I'm at the point now where as agents I felt that all landlords knew about it. I create lots of blogs and send lots of content out to all of our database, all of our landlords that manage properties, properties that we don't manage, and it turns out that actually most of them, not nearly all of them, don't actually read any of it and really don't know anything about it at all. And that's made me really think in the last couple of weeks, look, I really need to make sure that people are informed about this. It's going to change the private rented sector as we know it. Because of the speed to which it's coming through, we're expecting it to be law, by Easter of this year, so it's massive changes. So there's a lot to cover. But, so grab yourself a cup of tea if you're watching this, sit down, it's going to take a while, it's going to be a long one, but I think it's really important that, have it on in the background, just listening to doing things, but basically just to be informed, to know what's coming. We will make sure our landlords are well informed and adhering to the law as and when we get information, and anything we talk about in the next sort of 30-40 minutes, obviously it's not law yet, so those things are subject to change and can change. So until something is law, we don't 100% know, but the likelihood is what we talk about today, for all intents and purposes, is going to be becoming law by Easter. Some things are going to be immediate changes, and then others will sort of come out slower, we think, but again, we're not 100% sure on timelines yet.
Sure.
It's worth sort of touching on each of the points. I'll explain as much as we do know, and then obviously if anyone watching this has got any questions or queries, they can always contact us. All the information will be below, or they'll have our contact details.
Because I think one of the major kind of documented parts was the no fault eviction, section 21. I think that's one that most people probably know about and have spoken about.
100%, and that's the one for most people that's had the most sort of press coverage. Oh my goodness, they're getting rid of section 21s. Now, yes, they are getting rid of section 21, so for people that don't know, that's a no fault eviction. So at the moment, if you as a landlord want to serve notice on your tenant, you would serve them a section 21, which basically means you want your property back, you want possession back of your property. So they call it a no fault eviction because actually as a landlord you can just say, just want the house back, for whatever reason that may be. You serve a section 21 notice. It's a 2-month notice period. At the end of that 2 months, a tenant should vacate. Now, there are lots of various things that happen in terms of going to court and those sorts of things, or not going to court if we do an accelerated possession. Once a section 21 has been served, so there's lots of different things that we have to go through, but for all intents and purposes, you serve a section 21, it's a 2 months notice, your tenant should vacate. What they're looking to do with the Renters' Rights Bill is say, okay, no, we're scrapping section 21s, they will no longer be. We will just have a section 8 notice. So at the moment, we serve a section 8 under sort of various grounds, and under that section 8, you need to go to court. So they're getting rid of a section 21, where you don't have to go to court. We're only going to have a section 8 notice. And under that notice, there's going to be various different grounds for giving notice, various different notice periods. So some of the mandatory grounds they're going to keep are if a landlord, for example, wants to move back into the property, if the landlord wants to sell the property. So that's going to be a mandatory
Which
ground.
I think was most people's concern, wasn't it? That what if I then can't sell the house? And
So the notice can still be served under that ground under a section 8. However, the notice period a landlord needs to give is going to be longer. So it's moving from 2 months to 4 months, and you said 8 months then, 4 months, 2 months to 4 months notice, so it's doubling in terms of the period of time and notice you have to give your landlord to leave. Now, in terms of rent arrears and those sorts of things, so you've got persistent rent arrears, you've got tenants who are breaking terms of a contract, that sort of those sorts of grounds, you would still serve notice under that section 8, and then you will need to go to court. Now, where everyone's getting so concerned about this is that they are going to be bringing this out, but they're not reforming the court system. So at the moment, our last sort of couple of case studies that we've done in terms of getting possession of properties is when we serve a Section 21 notice. It's taken around 9 months. So 9 months in Gravesham to go from serving a notice to getting possession of a property, i.e. a landlord gets his property back or her property back and go into the property. Now, under this Section 8 notice, everyone's going to need to go to court. So without reforming the court system, actually how long is it going to take for a landlord to get their property back? Because actually they're going to need to wait to get those court dates. And until it starts to go through the courts and until we see actually what's the judge on the day in terms of discretionary grounds or mandatory grounds and the terms to which they give, how long is it going to take for landlords to get their properties back?
Yeah.
And that is where for most landlords the concern is, as well as the fact for rent arrears, which is what we sort of mentioned in terms of actually for lots of landlords when there's rent arrears, they want their properties back as quickly as possible. Now they're changing that notice from a tenant needing to be 2 months in arrears to 3 months in arrears. So actually before you can serve a Section 8 notice, your tenant needs to be at least 3 months in arrears.
Okay.
They're also extending the notice period to which you need to give as a landlord. So at the moment, a tenant is 2 months in arrears. You serve a Section 8 and the Section 8 notice is for 14 days, so 2 weeks. They're extending that to 3 weeks. So not only are you giving them, they need to be in arrears for a longer period of time, the notice period under the notice that you're giving is also extending, which again, for lots of landlords, actually, majority of our landlords have got mortgages on their properties. So to think, okay, well, for 3 months, they've got to wait for their tenant to be in arrears and then they've got to wait for a court system.
Yeah.
Lots of our landlords, they're not landlords that have got hundreds of properties and, lots and lots of money and all those sorts of things, which I think is what the reputation of landlords they get. The perception out there is that these awful landlords and they've got all this money and they're absolutely terrible, which just isn't the case. I mean, most of our landlords are either sort of, got 1 or 2 properties and they've thought, I'm going to, future-proof in terms of thinking about a pension for themselves and that sort of thing, or they'll have mortgages, and they aren't those people. And so really, they're being asked, to my mind, is actually to prop up what is the social sector. Because actually they're allowing people to live in their properties for longer, or they've got to allow people to live in their properties for longer, not paying rent, and it's going to take them a long time to actually get their property back.
Yeah.
And that's where the concern is for lots of landlords that I'm talking about this. How am I going to get my property back, really?
Yeah. I mean, if someone's got, let's say, like a good relationship with their tenant or landlord to tenant, or via the agent as well, can there be like a mutual agreement in terms of, okay, we don't need to go through the court process? I know that probably makes it sound really easy or completely easier than what it is. But
I mean, ultimately, if you're chatting to your tenant and you're saying, actually, I want to, I want to sell my property, or we want to move back in, you may have that relationship. They say, okay, I'll find somewhere else and I'll move. They may very well do that, but unless off their own back, but they can do that.
Yeah.
But if they choose not to do that, or they can't find something else, the only thing you can do is serve them notice and follow that legal process. Where the problem lies as well is ultimately if your tenant, for example, needs help from the council to rehouse them, for example. Councils at the moment, that there's a severe shortage of properties, and we're all aware there's a severe shortage of rental properties. So councils at the moment, in terms of of them rehousing people, they will only rehouse them once they have got a bailiff date, which means if you approach the council, you and I, and said, actually I need your help and I need a council house or what have you, they will tell that tenant, you must stay in your rented property until you get a bailiff date. Yeah. Otherwise we will not house you. They term it as you're making yourself voluntarily homeless if you move out of your own accord. So for lots of tenants, it's really distressing for them. They're not awful tenants. They're not there, they either can't afford to be where they are anymore, or they've outgrown a property and they need to move. They don't want to be in that situation. They feel awful for doing it. We're talking to tenants and they're saying, I'm so sorry to be doing this to my landlord. And of course they are. It's awful.
It's just how the system is.
Exactly. It's how the system works. They have to follow it. The landlord has to follow it. So effectively, the tenant is there and could still be there, because they've got to follow this court system, a year later, waiting to get their bailiff date, so the council will help them and rehome them. And that whole process, we could talk about this for hours, but that whole process is so awful for the tenant as well. Because actually then they get a bailiff date, and it might say in 7 days' time or 14 days' time the bailiff is arriving. The council then has 7 or 14 days to then rehouse this family, and that's it. And then this family ends up, anywhere the council puts them.
Yeah.
And this is where we come back to that whole thing of there aren't enough houses, and private landlords are basically being asked to prop up that social sector because they're keeping tenants in properties for longer because there is nowhere for them to go.
And I think one of the most striking things that I'd heard when we were talking was the fixed term tenancies. That's kind of being taken out. So where you might sign up for a year.
Yes, definitely. So at the moment, the majority of our tenancies are for 6 months or 12 months, which basically means in terms of a fixed term, a landlord and a tenant, they sign a contract for a period of time, a fixed time, typically 6 months, 12 months. During that time, a tenant lives in the property, a landlord can't ask them to leave unless they are, for example, in rent arrears. So that tenant has security of tenure, they know they can stay there for that period of time, and that landlord also really has security of a tenant, thinking, okay, the tenant can't leave until the end of it. What they're doing is they're saying, nope, we're going to scrap all that, you're not going to have a fixed term tenancy anymore. Any tenancies, so when the law comes out, what we expect to happen is, we haven't got an exact date, but with immediate effect, any fixed term tenancy in place will automatically become a periodic, which basically means any tenant or landlord can give notice at any time, and any new contracts that come into place will be on a periodic rolling month by month basis, which basically means all the terms of the contract still apply, but anyone can give notice really at any point. Now, having said that, when I say that, and there's going to be lots of different once we've got full details of the law when it comes out, I say you can give notice at any point. The landlord can't serve a Section 8 notice, even under one of the mandatory grounds, in that first 12 months.
Okay.
So actually, under a mandatory ground that the landlord has decided they want to sell their property, they can't do that in the first 12 months of any tenancy.
Yeah, but realistically a tenant can just give notice.
Their notice will move to longer, so their notice has moved from, at the moment they have to give 1 month's notice, their notice period has moved from 1 month to 2 months, so it has increased. But actually what the government is saying is they're doing this because they think that it's unfair for tenants to be stuck within a tenancy when you have a poor landlord, for example, not looking after a property, not maintaining it well or that sort of thing. So they're saying there's too many tenants out there that are having to deal with bad landlords who are stuck in tenancies they can't get out of. So what they're saying is actually, Mrs. Landlord, if you're not looking after your property as it should be, a tenant can give notice at any time. But what they're forgetting about that is actually for lots of tenants, they want that security of tenure. They want to know that, actually they are signed up for 12 months. They are signed up for 2 years, for example. And they want that. And so I actually feel like I'm bringing it in instantly across the board. I mean, at the moment we don't know about timescales. But in terms for all of us within the industry at the moment making decisions, it becomes very difficult. We know this is coming, and I'm saying to my landlords, actually, look, we are currently doing renewals, we're still doing renewals, but just be aware that in 2 months' time, this may move on to a periodic contract, and actually it's likely to. And actually what we're doing now, it may be null and void. Some of those landlords are choosing to say, let's not bother. Others saying, oh no, okay, let's carry on. And from our perspective, we will do either or. But we're expecting this to come. And there's been no sort of intimation from the government. They're thinking, oh, actually, no, we won't do this.
Sure.
So we are expecting it to come. So.
And then obviously, as kind of part of that, how rent's paid as well. Because there was a lot of tendency for some people, if it kind of fitted for them, to pay up front. For let's say like 12-month tendency, but I'll pay 12 months up front. Apparently that can't now be done either. So this is
one of the latest things that almost just sort of came out of the blue. Last month, sort of in January, they just decided that actually what they were going to do is say that tenants can no longer pay for a tenancy term up front. Now, I think it does depend where you live in the UK or in England in terms of how frequently this is happening, and actually in certain areas, from what I've sort of found and sort of heard, is that landlords are insisting upon it when it doesn't need to happen. And I can completely understand why the government might say that's not fair, that's not right. Why should Mrs. Landlord be able to say, no, actually you've got to pay, you can have this property for 12 months but you must pay up front. That's not fair. I completely get that. But the reality of the situation on the ground is that we have some tenants that pay up front, and that is a choice thing on their behalf because, for example, they can't get through referencing. So for a tenant to be able to rent a property, they need to be referenced. They need to earn enough to say they can afford to pay the rent.
Yeah.
So for some tenants, you know, they can't prove that. And actually, some of them can get a guarantor, which is, you know, fine. But again, where rents currently are at the moment, you know, a tenant has to prove their income is 2.5 times the yearly rent. A guarantor has to prove their income is 3 times the yearly rent. Okay, so that in itself, given where rents are going, is becoming harder and harder. So for a lot of our tenants, they've got savings in the bank. Now, if they still wanted to pay on a monthly basis, their savings in the bank would have to be the equivalent of the income. So they'd have to have 2.5 times the yearly rent of savings in the bank. Now, for most people, that just isn't feasible. They don't have that money. So what actually a lot of them do to get through the referencing and to have a pass so the landlords can get their insurances and that sort of thing, and to give the landlords some confidence in the fact they can pay, say, okay, well actually, whilst I can't prove I haven't got 2.5 times the yearly rent in my bank account, I do have 6 months, I do have a year, and I'll be able to pay that every 6 months moving forward. So it gives the landlord security, and it means from a tenant perspective, even though I don't earn enough, I've got this money and it means I can rent this property. Now for those people, they're sort of the lower income earners that really do need the support from the government, and actually that ability is being taken away from them. We won't be allowed to do that at all. Now who that is serving, I really don't know. As I say, I understand the concept of saying you must not do a blanket, a tenant must pay up front regardless, because that's not in people's best interest. But to remove it completely, I don't see how that is helping anyone. And we don't actually have many sort of overseas students, you know, we're not in a big university town or that sort of thing. But for lots of towns, for lots of parts of England, it's going to have a massive impact on those sorts of people that are just coming over here to go to university or to go to college and those sorts of things. They don't currently have bank accounts or those things where they can't get through the referencing. But they can pay it up front. They've got the finances, they've got the support. But they can't get through, you know, those credit checks and that sort of thing. So I mean, I don't know how that's the sector of the rental market is going to deal with that at all. I really don't.
Yeah, because I suppose when you think about different laws that come in and, you know, mandatory Ombudsman for all landlords, mandatory private rental sector database of landlords, there seems a lot that, let's say if someone's privately renting their property, like you say, a lot of landlords that just aren't aware of changes coming up, what
they can and can't do. I mean, both of those that you've just mentioned there, so a database and an Ombudsman, both of those, yes, regardless of whether you use an agent to manage your property or not, landlords will have to register with both, so an Ombudsman and the database. In terms of if they're not registered, I mean, they haven't confirmed yet exactly how it's going to work and how the system's going to work. But if they're not registered in terms of the fines that they're going to be distributing, I can see them being good things. I can, you know, if we look at them in isolation. So you think about an Ombudsman. Okay, great, because actually us as agents have to be part of an Ombudsman. So if a landlord or a tenant isn't happy with a service that we're providing or it isn't correct, they can go to the Ombudsman and get some form of recourse. Now actually, if you're a tenant and you're renting privately directly with a landlord, where is your recourse? Where is it you can complain about your landlord? And so I do think that's great, an Ombudsman, it's a good idea. It's holding those tenants, those landlords accountable, making sure that, you know, they're doing what they should be. I mean, we'll touch on some other laws that are going to be coming out within the Renters' Right Bill in terms of health and safety and property standards and those sorts of things, but actually 100%. Ombudsman's great. I think it becomes a bit scary with the raft of changes that are happening, that actually for a tenant, for them to be able to complain at the drop of a hat, and actually for lots of landlords, they talk about it's about all these awful landlords that are out there, these terrible landlords. Actually, the majority of landlords aren't awful. They aren't terrible, and the people that are breaking the law now, they're currently breaking the law and providing horrendous properties to poor tenants, you know, in the worst circumstances and conditions, preying on those people that you know really do need help. Those people are happy to break the law now. when all these new laws comes out, those landlords will still be happy to break the law. That doesn't. But actually, what this is doing is having a massive impact on the other 99% of landlords that are decent people who actually do want to provide decent homes and provide a good service and that sort of thing. And a lot of these laws are actually, in terms of tripping landlords up and thinking, I didn't realise I needed to do this. I didn't realise I needed to do that. And the fines to which they're going to be implementing. And handing out to landlords, I really feel like in terms of knowing what you're doing is becoming more the necessity to do so. And I think if you were managing a property yourself now, you really need to have a conversation with an agent and think, okay, I can no longer do this because it's scary in terms of the fines and that sort of thing. But I do think Ombudsman, okay, great. And tenants do need that sort of reform. In terms of database, so that's a separate thing. And this is almost like if you're a landlord, again, whether you're using an agent or whether you're a private landlord, you must be registered on the database.
Sure.
In terms of all the information they're saying that needs to go in there, we're not 100% yet, but it's basically enabling the councils to know a lot more information about the whole of the country in terms of what's being let, rents, details, all of those sorts of things in terms of the private rented sector. What's the picture? What does it look like? Again, it's giving tenants the ability to review their landlords. Okay, bit similar to Google, review were they a good landlord or were they not a good landlord? Which again, I feel is a positive thing. Having said that, we know in terms of our Google reviews, we've got hundreds of fabulous Google reviews, and the odd ones that aren't fabulous, actually, from my perspective, once I've read those, thinking that's absolutely, you've got, so rubbish is not the right word, but actually you read them and think, no, this happened because of X, Y, Z. And we have that ability to be able to respond and say, oh, no, this isn't right.
It's quicker and easier if someone's write a bad review than it is good.
Exactly. And actually, how it's going to work and what tenants can say may be completely unreasonable. We don't know whether a landlord is going to get the ability to be able to respond to that or not. And actually, why is there not a situation where a landlord can do a review on a tenant? Because actually, just because this relationship is all relationships are two-way. Actually, are they a good landlord? Have they been a good tenant? And just to have it based on landlords, I think is really one-sided. And again, a real missed opportunity, I think, on this as well, is that they haven't, for tenants, attached any form of credit rating to your rental payments. So actually, when I'm talking about, reviews for tenants, that would be a great thing to add. Actually, why haven't they said, okay, tenants' rental payments go towards their credit rating? If you want to get a mobile phone, which, your mobile phone might be 40 quid a month, I don't know, 60 quid a month, that goes towards your credit score if you don't pay it. But your rent, which is £1,600
and technically a contract,
£1,800 a month, a contract, has no impact. So they're saying that they're trying to help tenants, but where's that help for them in terms of actually, for lots of these tenants, for example, getting them on the property ladder? How amazing would it be to be like, right, we've actually attached rental payments to credit ratings. This tenant has been paying £1,800 a month for the last 5 years. Has got amazing credit and saved X deposit and can now get a mortgage.
But gets told by a bank that they can't afford it.
But exactly. And the bank now, it wouldn't go on their credit rating. They'd still be told they couldn't because rental payments don't go on credit history. So both of those things, I think they are good. They're good things, but again, it's all just sort of one-sided. And I think that is where the whole renters' rights bill. Previously, it's been discussed for many, many years, and it was previously under the Conservatives called the Renters Reform Bill, as it felt a bit more like we're reforming the rental system as a whole. This rename as Renters' Rights does feel very one-sided in terms of, we are talking about renters' rights here. They've still missed some tricks in terms of what I feel they could have added, and it is very much renters' rights as opposed to looking at.
And I suppose on that, discrimination against tenants is they're talking about obviously a ban on that, which face it should be the case.
I mean, under discrimination laws, standard discrimination laws, obviously that's all in place. What they're looking to do is basically say they're bringing into law that as a landlord you cannot discriminate against an applicant who is in receipt of any form of housing benefits, DSS, that sort of thing, and applicants with children. And they're bringing it in even to the extent of actually whether you as a landlord, perhaps your mortgage terms might stipulate that actually your tenants mustn't be in receipt of housing benefit, or actually, you know, you've got maybe children aren't to live there. This law will supersede that, will basically say no, regardless of what your contract is with your mortgagee, actually that doesn't matter. You as a landlord cannot discriminate against these individuals for having children or for being in receipt of housing benefit. So there used to be, I mean, sort of, you know, it's sort of stopped really in the last sort of year, but there used to be lots and lots of adverts basically saying no DSS, no housing benefit. I mean, that did stop, you know, 18 months ago, but for lots of landlords it was still a stipulation within their mortgage that actually people had to pass referencing, had to be in full-time employment, and, you know, they had to be, so they still couldn't do it anyway whilst we didn't advertise to that effect. But now, you know, you can't discriminate in that regard, which is a positive thing. Yeah,
even something small like pets. For instance, I think they're trying to make it easier, perhaps, if you've got pets.
Bring in pets, the same. In terms of you can't say no pets at all. They will be bringing out a process to which a tenant and a landlord has to sort of follow in terms of requesting a pet in writing and doing those sorts of things. And there'll be timescales associated with how soon a landlord needs to respond by, how they can't unreasonably refuse a pet, and lots of things like that. One thing they're going to do though is they're going to allow pet insurance or pets of damage to be stipulated as an agreed payment for a tenant. So a landlord can say, actually, you know, that's fine, but you must have pet insurance. So for example, if the pet doesn't you know, damages the property or what have you, which is great on paper. However, in practice, I mean, in terms of those actual insurance policies, I don't know at the moment in terms of their existence, how they will work, how we then confirm and ensure that that insurance policy is taken out on the first, you know, on day one, and whether, again, that is renewed every year, how you check that, how if they don't renew it, what that is. I mean, the Scottish system, they allow increased deposits for pets. I know, I think that would be a much easier thing to do, manage and then keep, but that's not something they're sort of discussing, so we will see. So under the tenant fees ban, we couldn't, or we weren't allowed to, there are only certain fees or charges we can accept from the tenant. This will become one of those things that we can say, no, you must have this particular insurance. But in terms of the reality of getting it, where from, how much, and how we manage, or landlords manage the tenants consistently getting it, we don't know yet. And
obviously you mentioned earlier about standard of properties, the decent home sort of standard that there needs to be, because obviously you have things, you know, which always been the case, making sure that gas safe and electric checks are all done. How broad does that cover that we think might be the case?
So they're bringing out the decent home standards, which is going to apply for all private sector properties. What we'll do is I'll put a link to it sort of underneath here, or what have you, so people can have a look and sort of see the extent to which you know, the standard of what a landlord's property should be in terms of keeping it you know, safe and in good order for tenants. So I think actually it's a positive thing. And the other thing they're bringing into law is Awaab's law, which unfortunately, it's probably about 18 months ago now. Unfortunately, a little boy really sadly died from the conditions property he was in. I'd like to add it was a social housing. It wasn't private rented sector house, but the mould within that property was really, really terrible, which unfortunately, you know, caused him to die, which was an awful situation and should never have happened, and is actually completely preventable. So they're bringing out this Awaab's law to say, look, you know, actually how we consider and look at mould within rented properties needs to be considered as a landlords in terms of how we sort of manage and look at controlling those things. It's not acceptable just to say, oh, actually, it's how a tenant's living in a property.
Yeah.
Now, in some instances,
I've rented it before and I'll rent it like that again.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And in some instances, some situations of mould from condensation that actually are as a result of, people not opening windows or that sort of thing. But it's not good enough just to blanket, no, it's your problem. So, and again, I mean, that's a positive thing in terms of ensuring the safety of tenants.
Which again is a renter's right to have a decent standard home to be living, 100%. Especially with levels of the rents. But
definitely.
And in terms of it mentions about strict controls of bidding and offers for tenants when a property is marketed. Obviously, that sounds like such a broad thing. So what does that cover?
They're saying what they've introduced, or what they're introducing is saying, okay, as because of it's not dealing with the issue that we have that isn't enough. There aren't enough rented properties out there. There aren't enough homes out there for people to sort of buy. What's happening is because of lack of supply, it's like any supply and demand issue. When there isn't enough of something, the price goes up. Now, when you've got, say, one property and you may have 5, 6, 10, 20 people all going for that property, what can happen is you go forward for almost like a bidding war, people would call it, and say, okay, well, bid the highest price that you want for the property.
Yeah.
And that's sort of a situation that lots of landlords and agents are encouraging in terms of, okay, so we get the best price. That's economics of supply and demand. But what they're saying is that actually that we will not be able to accept a rent higher than that to which a property has been marketed at.
Okay. Which
is just craziness, because actually at the moment, if we've got a property and we think, oh, could it get, let's say £1,500 a month, 1,500 or maybe more, 17 on a good day, let's have a thing. Okay, we'll try it at 17, for example, or we'll try it at 16 because we want to get it let really quickly, or whatever it may be. You make a decision based on a discussion with a landlord that says, okay, where do we want to pitch this? What are we sort of thinking? Now, if you know, as a landlord, no matter what, you cannot accept a rent above what is marketed at, what's that going to cause? We're actually going to be saying, okay, well, 100%. What we're going to do is say, okay, well, we think it's should be around sort of 1,600, on a good day maybe 17. Should we put it at £2,000 and see what happens? Because actually, if you know you can't accept something above, then we're at. So then instead of people sort of working up based on supply and demand, the quality of a property, what it's like, where it is, we're all going to start off higher and maybe work down or not, and that the whole thing, I just don't understand the concept of it in terms of how that's going to help a tenant, how it's going to keep rents low, and then talking about actual rents themselves. So we can't accept anything above a rental, above what it's marketed at. And then if we start talking about rent reviews, so we've mentioned the fact that all contracts are going to be periodic. We can't include any form of rent sort of review clauses within a contract, but a rent can be looked to be reviewed on a yearly basis using the relevant sort of notice. So we can still do that on a yearly basis. Now the tenant, as they do at the moment, has their right to be able to go to a first tier tribunal and say, oh, actually, I don't agree with that rent. And then it's the first tier tribunal that will come back, look at market value and say, okay, actually, the landlord's requested £100 increase from £1,200 to £1,300 a calendar month. Actually, having looked at market conditions, this property, if it was let again, would be £1,500 a month. So at that point, the tenant really has to think, do I think the landlord is being unreasonable or not? Because if they go to the first tier and they come back at a higher rent, the landlord could then charge them a higher rent. Yeah. Now, at the moment, that's at the moment. So what they're doing is they're changing that first tier tribunal. So they're saying, okay, actually, you can go to the tribunal, but they will not issue a rent higher than that to which a landlord has put forward. So actually, a tenant has got absolutely no reason to not go to the tribunal and say, actually, I'm not happy with that.
Because they've got nothing to lose.
They've got nothing to lose, because it's never going to go above that. Yeah. And you also can't backdate it. So who knows how long the process would take and you can't backdate it to when you requested it by.
Yeah.
And again, things like that, we're going to have a lot more detail when I'd like to think we're going to have a lot more detail when the law actually comes out, and we're going to have processes in terms of timescales and how it's going to work in action. But this is what we're expecting to happen. So those things, again, in terms of rents for landlords, it all feels so one-sided. And the fact is, so on that basis, when we're looking at sort of rent reviews, okay, so a landlord then is still charging under market value and will not get above that, and a tenant has absolutely nothing to lose to dispute it.
Yeah. Which obviously, I know we've said about renters' rights, but there is some parts of it that feel like they're not necessarily weighted towards landlords. But you were saying earlier about, if I had a property that I think I could get 1,500 on and I put it on for 1,800, because it's kind of going towards that, then technically you can get some people that are ultimately play the system really as well. But I just sort of feel that if you've got tenants that are then thinking, well, I'm desperate, I need to pay it, then there's some elements of the Renters' Right Bill that just feel like they're kind of counterproductive. And look, as we know, sometimes these things might not come in. I think it's kind of suggested a lot of what we've spoken about today kind of is realistically likely to. I suppose for me, one of the biggest things and kind of questions that I've had sort of through this is ultimately, what if a landlord doesn't comply? Is there likely to be these real strict, heavy
enforcement?
So,
and this is where it's going to get really interesting, because actually, it's all going to be now about council enforcement and the fines to which they're giving out. So for a lot of these, for non-compliance, even down to the Ombudsman and the database, I think they're starting at £7,000 fines. And then persistent non-compliance, I think the most recent thing I read was looking at sort of more like 40,000. They're basically saying, you comply or else, actually the fines are going to be exhaustive and we're going to sort of come for you. How they do that, how they're going to manage that, we all know that the councils sort of are understaffed, and it's difficult enough for them chasing council tax, and adding these things to their sort of workload. But given the size of the fines, I would suggest they would be looking to get whole new departments, because the fines will pay their wages, and based on the fines that we're seeing, would be really quite good wages for the council staff themselves, to be honest with you, in terms of sort of complying with it. I mean, we're noticing already within Gratian, actually, any properties that we are having that have tenants that have some form of top-up, the council are arranging inspections of those properties. And we've noticed that sort of since the end of last year. They didn't previously do that, and these are tenants just with top-up, so it's not full housing benefit tenants. We have very few of those, actually. But just with top-up, they want to arrange already inspections for the property, in terms of making sure that they're happy with them for those tenants. And that's what we're going to see consistently, time and time again, enforcements in terms of, you need to do X, Y, Z. From the basics of, there's a blind and you need to have, pull, the little pull cords in terms of what to wind the sort of blind cords over, to hand banisters, to extraction fans. There's a whole raft of things, and actually once the council have gone in, they've done their report, you have to do. There will be some sort of a recommendation and a compulsory, those sorts of things. But I think they're going to be getting more and more involved, and this comes back down to the private rented sector propping up social housing because there aren't enough houses. But fundamentally with things like that, I think they're making sure that the housing stock is a decent standard for people to be living in.
And I think basing it more around landlords, because there's been so many different things that have come out, over the past 10, 15, 20 years that have kind of lent towards people that do privately rent their let only, we call them, in terms of where someone just rents their own property, doesn't use an agent. We was at a conference Friday, and it really felt like a lot of people were, you've really got to look to go managed, have an agent that looks after it. And I appreciate we're coming from slightly a business point of view there, but when you think about the exposure, scary if you don't do what you should, but obviously a letting agent should be helping you comply with everything.
I mean, and I've said to our landlords in the last sort of 2 or 3 weeks some informational material that I sent out, which confused a lot of people, and they thought, oh God, actually, is this okay? Is that okay? Which certainly wasn't my intention. But the idea being, is that if you're paying an agent that you trust and knows what they're doing, they're going to make sure you're compliant. If you're not, you've got to do it.
Yeah.
And that's the long and short.
I mean, the cost of managed versus the
Versus
cost
a fine.
of a fine of even just not
100%.
signing up for a database.
100%. And the other thing I would sort of say is, definitely do your research and make sure you're happy, you're confident with any agent that you're going to instruct. Make sure that they are, we're not a regulated industry, so make sure that that agent, one, is part of an ombudsman, two, is a member of Property Mark, to make sure that they do know what they're doing. I would definitely strongly recommend anyone do something like that. I would also strongly recommend, I'm talking to all my landlords at the moment about their rent guarantee insurances. If we're going to get, the majority of my landlords, I'd say 90 to 95% of all our managed properties have some form of rent guarantee insurance through us. I would strongly recommend at this point, if you don't have any form of rent guarantee insurance, look into it, look to the policies and take one out. Because if your tenant does stop paying rent, I don't know, I would like to think the court system is going to hear particular more serious grounds, i.e. non-rent payers, prior to what they're going to do, discretionary grounds or grounds perhaps which are deemed less serious, as it were, but who knows.
And it's still the time it's going to take.
Exactly. So it's, if everything's now going through a court system that is already under it and taking a long time, that is one thing that I would seriously look at. Another thing, if you are managing yourself, the sort of insurances that you can get can be very different. So, and that is all just down to sort of research and having a look and speaking to different providers. As agents, we can provide different things to what you can buy from the market yourself. So again, I would just encourage people to talk to agents, talk to insurers. Do your research now and think, okay, is it worth me taking the risk and carrying on? Or at this point, do I want to say, actually, enough's enough, I don't want to risk not complying.
Well, it's about protection as well.
100%. And to be honest, and actually, I would actually say for lots of people, in terms of using an agent that you trust, it is an insurance policy in itself. Is that actually, all the while everything's running fine, you think, oh, I don't need it, I don't need the agent, it's fine, my tenant's paying rent, oh, this is fine, that's fine. The second something goes wrong, or your tenant says to you, oh, actually, I've noticed this new law or what have you, have you done X? The second something goes wrong, you wish you had someone there to support you, and that's what it is. It's being able to think, okay, it's an insurance policy for me, so I can just sleep at night and think, I don't need to worry because somebody else is doing the worrying for me, my rent's just coming into my bank account, really.
That was certainly how it felt to me, based on everything that we heard.
Everything we've just spoken.
You've got, the protection really starts from having an agent to look after your home for you, take a lot of the burden off.
I will try as much as I can. We've done this today because I was really keen for lots of my landlords who were like, actually, we haven't looked at this, or I wasn't sort of aware it was coming, and the calls that I was getting about it. And I'll try and do a lot more as and when we get more information, much shorter ones, more specific to do with each of sort of the elements, I think would be helpful, so we can go more in depth in them. And then people can just listen to what they do want to know or not. Actually, if you've got an agent managing your property, you might think, I really don't care, you're doing it. My landlord's equivalent to it could be like, actually, that's great, but deal with it. Just let me know what I need to do as and when if I need to, which is fine. I'm doing this for those that would still like to know, or actually landlords out there that aren't using an agent and thinking, oh, actually, maybe I should, I'm not sure, let's find out some information. So as much as I can, I'd like to educate people as much as possible in terms of what's coming. Just to really get yourself organised, what's coming, and then hopefully do the right thing for yourself and for your tenants. Just because I think it's just major reform. It's not it's not going anywhere.
No, that's it. And I think unless you're hearing from people that are in the know or that are taking the time to read up on it, they might do a news bulletin about it, but it won't be the finer detail where they break it all down. And obviously, hopefully, this has been something to kind of help our landlords, and
hopefully. If you've got any questions or anything at all, reach out to me, reach out to my lettings manager Gemma, via email, telephone. All the information will be on the relevant sort of sources, and just make contact. Really, we're here to help.